Want me to do Marv?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I could go. Chag Sameach. We are almost to the end of Pesach. Before we do, we'll say the afternoon service while it's still light, and then continue from there. We'll start on page 226 in your Shabbat Sidurim.
Ashrei Ashrei Vetecha Od Yalalucha Selo. תהילת אדוני ידבר פי, ויברך כבוסו שם קדשו לעולם ועד, ואנחנו נברך יה מעתה ועד עולם, הללויה. ויפתחו בך יודעי שמך, כי לא עזבת דורשך אדוני, אדוני חפץ למען צדקו, יגדיל תורו וידיר.
The cantor will sing aloud the first page of the Amidah, page 242a, and then we'll continue individually pages 244 to 246, including relevant passages for Pesach.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu ve'Elohei Avotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, ve'Elohei Yaakov, Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor v'Hanora El Elyon, Gomel Chasodim Tovim, Ve'Konei HaKol, V'Zocher Chastei Ovot, U'Mevi Go'el Livnei V'Nehem, L'man Shemo Be'ahava, Melech Ozer U'Mosheh U'Magen, Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham, אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, בחיי מתים אתה רב להושיע, מכלכל חיים בחסד, מחיי מתים ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר, מי כמוך בעל גבורות ומדום מלך, מלך מימית ומחיה ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה לחיות מתים, ברוך אתה אדוני מחיי המתים. אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, וקדושים בכל יום יהללוך סלע, ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש.
If you're still reciting the Amidah, feel free to continue at your own pace. Aleinu, page 248.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצא בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. ככתוב בתורתך, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד.
In our time of need to reflect on and hope for a better world, the proper setting to recite the words Yikadal v'Yikadash Shmei Rabbah is not available to us, but the words still call v'yamlich malchutei b'chayechon v'yomechon, that God's rules soon be accepted during our lives. Yibarach v'yishtabach v'yipa'ar v'yitramam v'yidnaseh, praised and celebrated, lauded and worshipped. May you bring peace to the universe, to all of us. Let us say Amen. May be seated. Okay, so there have been other holidays that I've done this where we are reaching the end of the holiday. It was time to say Mincha. In fact, we probably, we were probably a little close on that. It's getting pretty dark. But we're not quite at the point yet to say Havdalah. And whereas on a night where we go from day 1 to day 2 of a holiday, where I'm not as concerned about letting the new day in a little early, for when we end a holiday, I think that it is important to end at the correct time. So the idea is to end at 8:45 p.m., end our proceedings here. So what I'm going to do is I'll do some teachings for the next 25 minutes or so, and then we'll do Ma'ariv and Havdalah. And hopefully about that, then it's at 8:45, and then we can enjoy our bread sandwiches, as I always like to put it. I don't think I've ever actually done this, but I like to say that to end Passover, I like to have a piece of bread in between two pieces of bread. Maybe one year I'll actually do that. So for those tuning in and those who haven't changed the channel or gone to something more interesting on the internet, I hope you'll enjoy some midrashim, some stories. And I think what is appropriate to do as we are at the point in the calendar where we go from the Exodus from Egypt to the encounter at Mount Sinai with Shavuot, it makes sense to do some midrashim about the experience that the Israelites had during those several weeks in between. And there actually are a lot of things that happen in between. Some of them, one of them very notably is that of the manna, the existence of the food that would sustain them on their journey, the well, the first, figuring out how to get water, the existence of the cloud of glory, and then the battle with Amalek. So there's a lot of things that happen in just a few weeks because the Israelites are at that point where they finally reached independence from Egypt, and they now are looking around saying, now what? And obviously, there has to be some very quick answers. It reminds me of the end credit scene in the movie Finding Nemo. Believe me, this has something to do with this. Finding Nemo, in which the different fish from the aquarium in the dentist's office are miraculously able to escape. And they're able to escape because they are scooped into sandwich bags filled with water, and then when the humans aren't looking, they make a getaway out the window and into the bay. And so they're able to actually pull off the escape. They're all able to get out, and there they are floating in these sandwich bags of water, and they're just floating on top of the bay in the bags, and they're celebrating, and then they're silent for a moment, and then one of the fish says, "Now what?" So this is the now what part of the journey. So first of all, the manna. This is from the Talmud, from Babylonian Talmud of Yoma, that Moses said in Exodus chapter 16, verse 18, "It is Adonai who will give you flesh to eat in the evening and bread in the morning to the full." And the explanation here that's given is manna in the morning and then quail in the evening. Rabbi Acha bar Yaakov said, "At first Israel were like hens randomly pecking away in a heap of refuse until Moses came and fixed definite meal times for them." So it's one thing to escape, but then you have to figure out, all right, what are we going to do? What are we going to eat? And for that brief amount of time, they really were kind of lost. And then thankfully, a solution is found. And then that solution becomes known as manna. So this is from the same tractate of Talmud, basically a page later. The disciples of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai asked him, "Why did the manna not come down for Israel just once a year?" He replied, "Let me answer you with the parable of a mortal king who had a son. When the king provided him with his sustenance once a year, the son visited his father only once a year. When the father began to provide him with his sustenance daily, the son had to call on his father every day. So it was with Israel. If an Israelite had, say, 4 or 5 children, he would worry. He would say, 'Perhaps the manna will not come down tomorrow, and all my children will die of hunger.' And so because the manna was coming down daily, the Israelites were compelled to direct their hearts to their parent in heaven every day." So in other words, God provided the manna every day so that every day the Israelites would be reminded of God's goodness and generosity, etc. Which is a lovely thought, but there are also practical matters to consider. Another reason, they say, is that they were able to eat it while it was still warm, right? How would you like it look, we're all used to, well, I don't know if all of us, but if any of you have belonged to the stores, wholesale clubs such as Costco or BJ's, and, they mostly sell things in very large quantities, right? You got a year's supply of macaroni and cheese and things like that. They sell things in just these huge supplies, but, you can't do all your shopping there because, let's face it, do we all have the space, and never mind that, the refrigeration for cold items to actually keep all these things fresh throughout the year? Probably not. And so, if God had just sent a heap down every year, then, okay, the first day it's fresh, maybe another couple days after that it's, it's not so good. So the idea is to provide fresh manna. And then, and I think this one is perhaps the most obvious answer, still another reason for daily manna, the Talmud tells us, is to lighten the burdens that had to be carried during the journey. In other words, what are they going to, they had enough to lug around, right? They eventually would have the Mishkan to carry around. A year's supply of food would have been a bit much. I think there's, by the way, so I'm editorializing, I think there's another much more practical reason, which is that when you ask why didn't the manna fall once a year, you would ask that because we have the knowledge that the Israelites would be wandering for 40 years. But that wasn't necessarily the plan when they left Egypt. When they left Egypt, the plan was, okay, they'd take a little bit of time at Sinai and make the Mishkan. That was maybe a year, maybe a little more, but then you'd pretty much go straight to the promised land. But because of the incident of the spies, God then says, all right, you're going to be wandering for 40 years now, one for every day that the spies were in Israel. So it wasn't the initial plan. So I think that perhaps is the most obvious answer, which is that why didn't God send it down, once a year? It's because, well, God didn't think it would take that many years to get from Egypt to the Promised Land. So that's my thought on it. But so there are practical answers to this, and then there are also just spiritual answers as well. Here's something regarding the manna from Exodus Rabbah, a Midrashic collection. Manna is described in Scripture as bread, as honey, and as oil. All right, so there are three different words to describe the manna. How are the differing descriptions to be reconciled? Young men tasted in it the taste of bread. Old people, the taste of honey, and infants, the taste of oil. So this is where we get this idea that the manna tasted pretty much however you wanted. And I remember learning this, the first time I learned about manna when I was a kid, when we were doing stories from the Torah, and, learning about, the manna, it looked like, it didn't really have much of a look to it, but it tasted like however you want. We thought to ourselves, oh my God, if you wanted it to taste like pizza, it could taste like pizza every day. Oh my gosh, that's great. So you had all these different thoughts about what the manna would taste like. And so this is where we get this idea that the taste of manna depended on your desires, on your appetite. So we've talked about food. Why don't we talk about water? This from Shir HaShirim Rabbah, commentaries on the Song of Songs. Rabbi Yochanan said, "The well used to water all kinds of garden herbs, all kinds of seeds for planting, and all varieties of trees. You can see for yourself that it was so, for after Miriam died and the well stopped watering plants, the people said, in Numbers chapter 20, verse 5, this is no longer a place of seed of figs or of vines." It's taught that it is because of Miriam's merits that the people were able to get water. And the reason why they get that is because right after the mention of Miriam's death in Numbers chapter 20, right at the beginning, the people look at Moses and say, hey, we need water. So they put two and two together and say, well, that's because of Miriam. And so I don't know how many of you have the practice of having putting an extra cup of water on your Seder table, and that is supposed to be Miriam's cup, or Kos Miriam. And so that is a custom that I keep, that we have Kos Miriam in addition to Kos Eliyahu, the Elijah's cup as well. So now we have a little bit about the well itself. Now, but by the way, the idea is that the well continues to provide water for the people constantly, consistently through all the time of the wandering. So this is a bit of from Numbers Rabbah and also from another source commenting on the topic of Sukkah. It says, the well that was with Israel in the wilderness had extraordinary properties. It resembled a rock the size of a beehive, from which, as out of a narrow-necked jug, water coming out in a trickle shot high up into the air like a geyser. The well rolled up mountains with Israel and went down into valleys with them. Indeed, wherever Israel encamped, the well rested close by on an elevated spot opposite the entrance to the tent of meeting. So it was a very portable well. This is, try to take out of your mind, when we usually think of a well, we think of, this large hole in the ground with, rocks surrounding it so that people don't fall in so easily, and then a little apparatus to stick the pail in and all that. Think instead of, pretty much like a canteen, if you will, just like a little, something like this. So very portable. The princes of Israel, it continues, would come and walk around the well with their staves as they chanted the song, "Spring up, O well, sing ye unto it." Now this is from Numbers chapter 21, verse 17. So we have an actual account of this song of the well. This is one of several examples of Shirah that we have in the Torah. One of those examples, perhaps the most famous one, we read yesterday, the Shirat Hayam, the song after crossing the sea. But this is a much shorter one. This is really the song of the well. And so this is something where the heads of the tribes would sing this, and there's a little more to the song, we'll say in a moment. At that, the commentary continues, the waters welled up, rising high like a lofty pillar, and each of the princes, digging into the ground with his staff, channeled water toward his tribe and toward his family, as is said, this is the next verse, the well which the princes dug, which the nobles of the people delved with maces with their own staffs. So in other words, just picture the princes are surrounding this little, circle, and then there's this little trickle that just shoots up like a geyser. And so then they take, and what they do is they take their staff and take, some amount of water, stick it in there, and then that allows a portion of that water to trickle toward each of their respective tribes. I don't know if I'm describing it exactly. I don't know if I have a clearer picture myself, but that's, I think, that they're trying to get that idea. Thus the water, it continues, flowed in all directions throughout Israel's camp, watering all the surrounding wasteland. It branched out into streams so large that Israelites would seat themselves in small boats and go visiting one another. There was no need to row, for a man who went upstream on the camp's right side would, as the current reversed itself. So it actually, the note here says that it's even through underground tunnels. This is quite the production here. A man would return downstream on the right side, and so it was with the man who set out on the camp's left side. So, imagine, like a waterway, kind of like, when you go to the airport and you have these, moving walkways. Well, imagine that with water, and you're in boats, and it just goes automatically, and you just, float right through. Even the overflow of drinking water spilled on the ground became a wide river, which coursed toward the Great Sea, meaning the Mediterranean Sea, and upon its return brought back from there all the things in the world that were desirable. Okay. So that question that people often ask? Okay, they built the Mishkan, they built the tabernacle, and they got all this incredibly luxurious material. Where do they get that from? And yes, some of the idea is that some of it came from the Egyptians, that as the Israelites were leaving, they took some stuff with them. But this is another theory for it, that the water would go into the Mediterranean and would provide a channel from which anything you wanted would come any great material you wanted would then, come, on this same waterway. So it created this portal to all the luxurious things. So that's, it is quite fanciful, but I think it's kind of a fun idea. Okay. We learn about the Ananei Kavod, right? The clouds of glory. That God followed the people with clouds. That's how the people knew where to go, where to wander, etc. And we have in Exodus chapter 13, verse 21, Adonai went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to guide them, etc. The Mechilta and Bamidbar Rabbah, two different Midrashic collections, ask, how many clouds of glory encompassed Israel in the wilderness? All right, so is it just two? Right? Is it just the one by day and the one by night? 7 clouds. One at each of the 4 sides, I guess the 4, north, east, west, and south. One above them, one beneath them, and the one that advanced before them raised every lowland, lowered each highland, and thus turned them all into level ground. Wow. So the Israelites were able to walk at 0 elevation the entire time because of one of the Ananei Kavod. And not only that, as that cloud advanced, it also killed snakes and scorpions and swept and sprinkled the road before them. So this was not rough road. This was, in fact, God literally paved the way, literally. Now, all of these, midrashim indicate just all these tremendous miracles that God is doing. Right? So in other words, as if God had not done enough with the plagues and with the splitting of the sea, now God is providing everything that people might need with a certain amount of comfort. And the idea is that this lasts throughout, many of these things last throughout the time of their wanderings. We read on at least a couple of occasions in the book of Deuteronomy that throughout the 40 years of wandering, their sandals never wore out. Their clothes never wore out. Everything at the end of 40 years was as fresh and good as new as you could ever hope for. Which might explain why, at least if you believe these midrashim, why God was so infuriated by the people's whining. How can you whine when you have everything you need? As it is said, the fault finder, I think it's a Henry David Thoreau quote, the fault finder will find fault in paradise. I'm not saying this was paradise, but the idea is that the Israelites have it set up pretty well for them. So, Amalek. We'll close with a little bit about Amalek. This was the other big thing that happened between the Exodus and the encounter at Mount Sinai. The people said, is Adonai among us or not? And then came Amalek. So this is a case of smichut parshiot. This is a case of 2 verses that are next to each other that it might seem like they have nothing to do with each other, but the rabbis beg to differ. So the people are saying, is the Lord among us or not? That's the end of Exodus chapter 17, verse 7. And then Exodus chapter 17, verse 8 says, then came Amalek. Right? This is when Amalek attacks. So this midrash from Tanchuma, Rabbi Levi said, what parable applies here to Israel? The parable of a child who was perched on his father's shoulders in the marketplace. Each time the child saw a desirable object, he said to his father, 'Buy it for me.' And his father bought it for him the first time, the second time, and the third time. While they were walking, the child saw his father's friend and asked him, 'Have you seen my daddy?' The father spoke sharply to his son, 'Silly boy, you are riding astride my shoulder. Whatever you want, I buy for you, and yet you ask this man, "Have you seen my daddy?" What did the father do then? He dropped him from his shoulder, and a dog came by and bit the son. A little harsh. I don't endorse this, even though it kind of reminds us of Chad Gadya. But you can understand why the father's frustrated, right? I mean, the father is giving his son literally a free ride and then plenty of nice stuff to go with it. And yet the son just forgets that his father's even there. You know, it's the case of, you hear this phrase that he was, somebody was born on third base and thinks he hit a triple, right? Doesn't realize all the help they've gotten in the meantime. So too, the Midrash says, as soon as Israel went out of Egypt, 7 clouds of the Holy One's glory encompassed them. They asked for manna, and the Holy One sent it down for them, for quail, and God brought it to them. After God had given them all they wanted, they began to have doubts, demanding to know, is the Lord among us or not? The Holy One said to them, you doubt my presence in your midst? As you live, I shall make you aware of it. Look, here comes a dog to bite you. And who was the dog? Amalek. For the very next verse says, then came Amalek. The lesson seems to be that when you take things for granted, you do so at your own peril. Now, I'm not here to comment on God's ideas of justice. I'm not saying that the people deserved an attack from Amalek. But I am trying to say that when we take good things in our lives for granted, and then when we have strokes of bad luck, as we all do, it feels all the more shocking. And we are perhaps not very prepared for it. The people arguably are not very prepared for the attack from Amalek. This is why it is considered to be such a surprise. People gotten everything they wanted, and now for the first time since their time in Egypt, they are facing some real adversity. How will they handle it? Well, God is able to deliver them to victory. But as we know from biblical history, from many stories that follow, sometimes the Israelites aren't quite so lucky. It's a lesson about when we take things for granted, we set ourselves up for disappointment. Whether we deserve that disappointment or not is another question. So those are some midrashim about the events that happened to Bnei Israel in the weeks leading up to the encounter at Mount Sinai, which we will be celebrating at the end of next month, the holiday of Shavuot. But we got a few things to do between now and then, including saying the evening service for weekdays as we formally conclude Pesach. Let's return now to our Sidurim. Kindly rise as we turn to page 281. Vehu rachum yechaper avon v'lo yashchid v'hirba liyashiva po v'lo ya'ir kol chamato Adonai Hoshia hamelach yanenu v'yom korenu. You may be seated. Baruch atah Adonai. El chai v'kayam tamidim lo chalenu le'olam va'ed baruch atah Adonai amari v'aravim avat olam b'yid Yisrael m'chav haftat.
V'avadcha tasir mimenu le'olamim baruch atah Adonai ohev amo Yisrael. El melech neman shema Yisrael. Adonai Eloheinu Adonai echad. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol me'odecha ve'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavecha hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam b'shivtecha b'veitecha u'vlechtecha v'aderech u'shochbecha u'vkumecha u'kshartam leot al yadecha v'hayu l'totafo b'neinecha u'chtavtam amzo beitecha u'visharecha v'ayam. Ani Adonai Elohechem asher hotzeti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim liod lachem le'Elohim ani Adonai Elohechem. Middle of 283. Umalchuto beratzon kiblu aleihem Moshe v'nei Yisrael echanu shira b'simcha rabba v'yamru chulam michamocha belim Adonai michan mochen darba kodesh norati lo osef elet malchutecha uvanecha bokei hayam lifnei Moshe ze elianu v'yamru Adonai imloch leolam va'ed v'nemar kifad Adonai et Yaakov ugealo miad chazak mimenu baruch atah Adonai ga'al Yisrael hashkivenu Eloheinu shalom. Ushmor tzeitenu v'oenu l'chaim u'shalom me'atah ve'ad olam baruch atah Adonai shomer amo Yisrael ad. Baruch Adonai. Ki hamalchut shelcha hi ul'olmei ad timloch bechavod ki en lanu melech ela ata baruch atah Adonai hamelech bichvodot tamid yimloch aleinu le'olam va'ed ve'al kol ma'asav. We rise and continue individually with the Amidah 286 through 291. Please include the paragraph on 287 for the conclusion of Yom Tov. If you're still reciting the Amidah, feel free to continue at your own pace. Please rise if you're able, page 55, as we count the Omer. Last night we counted the seventh night of the Omer. We are ready to fulfill the mitzvah of counting the Omer as it is ordained in the Torah. You shall count from the eve of the second day of Pesach, when an Omer of grain is to be brought as an offering 7 complete weeks. The day after the 7th week of your counting will make 50 days. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu al sfirat ha'omer. And if you look in the middle of page 56, Hayom shmona yamim shehem shavua echad v'yom echad la'omer. Tonight is the 8th day of the Omer, making a week and a day of our counting. It is day 8, number 8. I think Gary Gaetti wore that for the Cubs for a couple years there. Well, I'm sure there are other number 8s that are worth mentioning, but yeah, that's what I got. 297, Aleinu. Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon ha'kol atzeit gedula liotzer bereshit shelo asanu kagoye ha'aratzot velo samanu k'mishpechot ha'adama shelo sam chelkeinu kahem v'gor aleinu kechol hamonam v'anachnu korim u'mishtachavim u'modim lifnei melech malachei ha'malachim hakadosh baruch hu shelun teshmayu. How can I go look? Kakatu b'tartach Adonai loch le'olam va'ed v'nemar v'haya Adonai l'melech al kol ha'aretz bayom hahu yeh Adonai echad u'shemo echad. In our time of need to reflect on and hope for a better world, the proper setting to recite the words Yikadal v'Yikadash Shmei Rabbah is not available to us, but the words still call v'yamlich malchutei b'chayechon of yomechon. The God's rules soon be accepted during our lives. Yibarach v'yishtabach v'yipa'ar v'yitramam v'yidnaseh. Praised and celebrated, lauded and worshipped. May you bring peace to the universe, to all of us. Amen. And we'll finish up our proceedings with a quick Havdalah on 299. As it is a weekday, we only do the blessing over the wine and then the blessing at the bottom of the page. Savrei chverai baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei pri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamavdil ben kodesh lechol ben or lechoshech ben Yisrael la'amim ben yom hashvi l'sheish yimei hamaseh. Baruch atah Adonai hamavdil ben kodesh lechol. Shavua Tov. We're going to have Shabbat pretty soon, but Shavua Tov, but happy end of Passover. Eshkoach to the cantor. We'll see you soon. Rochester.